that all?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Great. Well, thank you, Joanna. So yeah, just the introduction. My name's Tori and I'm one of the co-founders of Shift, and thanks very much for having me today. My colleague Rachel is also joining us, who has a background in creative campaigns and communications, and will be able to help answer any questions you might have during our time today. So yeah, as Joanna mentioned, Shift has historically done work with the RSA around socializing our approach to design through workshops and blogs, as well as setting some live briefs for the Student Design Awards. And I recently reconnected with Rebecca and Joanna and the design team, and they were kind enough to invite me to talk to you about Shift's current strategy and approach to design. So that's why I'm here today. And today I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to some of Shift's principles for practice when we're designing for social change. And what I'm going to cover is who I am, introduce Shift, talk about some of our principles for practice, and there will be a time for some questions and discussion at the end there. So yeah, if we could just, Rachel's going to be joining us. So at the end, if there's like, throughout the thing, if there are any questions that you have, please just pop them in the chat, and then we'll have some time to sort of answer them towards the end of the session. It's also going to make this session a bit interactive, and I'll ask you some questions too. So if you could have a piece of paper and a pen handy, that would be great. So first of all, a little bit about me. So professionally, I'm co-founder of Shift, a leader in social innovation space for the last 12 years. I would describe myself as a creative director, a human-centered designer, and a maker of delightful things. I've helped launch a series of award-winning social ventures. Our team has won Webbies and Tech for Goods and a number of different industry awards. I've acted as a consultant to the non-profit sector with organisations like NCT, Welcome, and a Freud Centre. I've helped corporates increase their social impact with working with organisations from Google to Coke to Sainsbury's. My background is I trained and worked in the advertising industry, won a number of industry awards, and I think I bring a lot of that advertising world mindset to what I do today. I'm also going to include this side, which is some other bits about me. I'm also a mum of 2 kids under 5. I'm passionate about low plastic, low carbon footprint lifestyles. I'm interested in community-run food growing initiatives. I love outdoor swimming, and I love making things. And here are some pictures of the things that I've grown, sewn, knitted, painted, or given birth to. So a little bit about me. I'll start with a bit next with a bit of an intro to Shift. So Shift is a multi-award-winning design and research nonprofit with 10 years experience addressing complex social issues. We are a curious, obsessive, rigorous, creative and thoughtful group of design doers. We come from various backgrounds with deep expertise, experience or interest in research, strategy and design for good, and making things work in the real world. We work on a really broad range of projects, always in partnership with other socially focused organisations. And we've got specialist knowledge and experience, particularly around 4 impact areas that we've been working in the last 5 years: childhoods, financial well-being, mental health, and food. So we held ourselves to some principles which we practice when we structure and deliver work at Shift. They're a reflection of what we care about and give us a shared definition of good. Before I go into these, it's worth saying, first of all, these principles are definitely not definitive. They broadly reflect our practice now, but these too may be iterated as we work and learn. Shift's the place of exploration, and we're constantly aiming to learn and evolve as an organisation. So being transparent and open about our practice and inviting comment and challenge from other organisations is part of that process. So thank you in advance for your questions and thoughts. That's what we're here for. Secondly, these principles aren't discrete, but overlapping, and often our actions are determined by more than one of these principles. These principles are also emergent and reflect a direction of travel for our team. Some of them we've made good progress against, and others we have good intentions around, but our practice is still very much evolving. And fourthly, they're not very original. They're all influenced and inspired by the individuals and organizations around us that we admire and who we aim to emulate in our approach. You know, they're practiced widely by others, and many are now very standard practice, so they're not, you know, wildly different. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through these principles, and for each one I'll tell you a bit about why we practice them, how we practice them, and talk through a case study. So here are some of our principles for practice when designing for social change that I'm going to talk about today, about being user-centered, equitable, collective, open, and adaptive. So I'll go through them in turn. So let's start with user-centered. So the first one is being about user-centered, and this term can mean many different things. But for me, coming from a background in the advertising industry, where it's all about considering how to make something appeal, I often think about this in terms of creating things that are delightful, appealing, useful, or understandable to the people it's for. So why do we have this principle? When we're putting something into the world, anything from a report to a new policy suggestion, to a community engagement initiative, to a product, to a service, we are having to compete with all the other ideas and content and brands and material that everyone else is absorbing every day. We need to vie for the attention of people we're designing with and for. And it's too easy for information, initiatives, and ideas, or anything else you're producing, to be overlooked. So what kind of things do we do? We undertake user research, whether that's in the form of ethnography, peer-to-peer research, interviews with experts, or any other research methods, to unearth insights about what people need and like and are driven by and put off by. And this helps us to create information, initiatives, ideas that are genuinely compelling to the audience. We like to look outwards, taking inspiration from brands and cultural material and other initiatives that are loved by the people we're designing for. We often design alongside our audience in co-design workshops. We do concepts and prototype testing with people, for example, using surveys and interviews and focus groups and role plays. And crucially, it's not just about co-design. We also use really talented creatives to help with concept generation, visual design, copywriting, user experience design, brand building, to create things that meet the needs and desires that we unearthed during our research. So I'm going to talk through an example in practice. So we were commissioned by Nesta and the Scottish Government as part of the Data Dialogues initiative to find out what young people think about their health and care data being used and shared. But how could we make the act of sharing their opinions about this quite dry and theoretical topic engaging for young people? And how could we bring to life the implication of decisions that they might make about health and care data sharing in order to unearth what young people really thought about this? So Shift built an online social game called Scotland on Mars that leads players through different choices around future data sharing scenarios and shows them the implication of their decisions. The mechanics of the game are simple. You're introduced to an imagined future and asked to make a series of decisions, each of which has an implication and impacts what is presented to you next. But when we tested it with young people aged 15 to 18, being a game, it was very popular, and it helped reveal young people's opinions on this important topic. Okay, so now I have a question for you. So please take out your pen and your paper and have a little think about this. I want to ask you, how much in your own work do you currently act in a user-centered way? Obviously, there's a lot of people here today, and you all have different roles, so you have to think about how this principle comes up for you in your own work. But I want you to just jot down a response from 0 to 5, or from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all and 5 meaning all the time. So this is just for yourself. I'm not going to ask you to share these numbers with the group. It's just an exercise for self-reflection, and we can discuss it as a group at the end if we have time. But just to take a moment for yourself. Okay, and now I'm going to ask you another question. How much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more user-centered way? I want you to jot down your response, a number from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all and 5 meaning a lot. Okay, I'm not going to give you long on these, but just a little hunch-based notes down, please. So I'm going to move on to the next principle. So this one's about being equitable. So why do we have this principle? Human-centered design, which has an obsession with this first principle of being user-centered, has done a lot to put users at the heart of solution building. But we're also interested in how this can be taken further. So it's not just always the same humans who are centered in the process, and the idea of designing for the rainbow and not just for the mean. And also to question the power dynamics that come with user-centered design, which traditionally has quite an active designer and then a subject who is designed for. And I think a lot of current thinking is highlighting where, for an example, an external funder current thinking is highlighting whether an external funder is the best person to identify the issues that should be addressed, for example, as opposed to these coming from the communities themselves. And whether currently widespread research and design techniques could be extractive of the communities they're supposed to be helping. For example, asking marginalized people to repeatedly explain their experience as part of user research, which can be traumatic and can also perpetuate those power imbalances and inequalities. So how can these methods be adjusted? So we're asking, how can power, resource, and agency be shared fairly with people and communities? So what kind of things are we doing? I think it's worth noting, first of all, that this is something we're educating ourselves around, and these intentions very much reflect a direction of travel, but we're still very much at the start of our journey on this. But one really useful matrix to consider is the 2, 4, with, and by matrix. So this was written about in a blog by the founders of the Relationships Project, which is a spin-off from Shift advocating for relationship-centered design. And the matrix shows 4 modes of designing and examines the power dynamics of different types of relationships, namely designing to, for, with, and by people. So when we do design to others, we don't include them in the design process. When we do design for others, we're taking them into account and designing for our understanding of their experience, preference, needs, priorities. When we're designing with, we act collaboratively, designing side by side with the intended users. And when design is by communities, i.e. the users or groups who stand to benefit from the change or innovation, the process end to end is led from within. And we'll be honest that actually this one about design by is not something that we've done much of at Shift, but it's something that's really powerful and reflects a really exciting direction of travel. What we are doing already is taking more participatory approaches, such as peer-led research and design, building deep understanding in a few contexts so we can come from a more informed place, seeking out more diverse experts to inform research, so not just professionals, but those with lived experience, trying to understand and surface bias, though this is very hard and we are very imperfect. Where possible, advocating for design processes that keep knowledge within communities. For example, aiming to communicate research findings back to participants, not just funders and partners, and checking our language. So words like beneficiaries describe the people we're designing with or design is being done by can be problematic and perpetuate those power imbalances. So I'm just going to talk through an example. We are currently working with Welcome and UNICEF on a global research project exploring how to increase young people's involvement in shaping solutions for global challenges. And the research is taking place across Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, and Shift has led the UK-based work. So the project took a very participative approach, whereby the research was shaped and carried out by young people. So for the UK work, we hired a team of young researchers aged 18 to 24 and supported them to co-lead the project, shape the research questions and methods, carry out the interviews, shape the analysis, and define the key insights. We're also taking responsibility for the designing up and socializing of the insights from across the global project. And again, taking a participatory approach, and have recruited a global team of young creatives aged 18 to 24 who are involved in the graphic design and illustration, copywriting, video editing, and web build of a digital platform that's documenting the project and highlighting the insights as they emerge. Okay, so I've got another question for you. So please take out your pen and your paper and have a think about this question. How much in your own work do you currently act in an equitable way? A way that means power, resource, and agency is shared fairly with people and communities. So jot down your response, a number from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all and 5 meaning all the time. I'm not going to ask you to share these numbers, so it's just an exercise for self-reflection. Okay, and I'm going to have another question for you. How much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more equitable way? How much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more equitable way? Again, number 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all and 5 meaning all the time. 5 meaning a lot. Okay, let's go into the next principle. So the next principle I'm going to talk about is collective. So why do we have this principle? We believe that the social challenges we're facing are too complex and intractable for a single discipline or organisation to address in isolation. By having a clear understanding of who else is doing what to address an issue allows you to act in the most effective way with or alongside others. If you're working in partnership with other organisations, it allows you to achieve greater reach and impact, bringing different perspectives and experiences and expertise to a problem. And working with an awareness of the landscape makes the best use of an organisation's resource or assets. So you're not replicating what's already out there, but instead adding fuel to what's working or designing in the gaps. So what kind of things do? We lobby for ideas that are in service to the sector, not only the actor. We help our partners act in a coordinated, collective and collaborative way. We help organisations consider the role they're playing in the wider ecosystem, not replicating what others are already doing. And we aim to leverage and contribute to the existing infrastructure, data, networks and technology that's out there. So I'm going to talk a little example of this. I'm going to talk about an initiative that was first launched in 2010, so a while ago, HistoryPin. HistoryPin is a global initiative that encourages and equips people to bring communities together through sharing stories, old photos, and cultural memory. Shift developed a communal digital archive, which is a website designed in partnership with Google, where users can pin their content, for example, an old picture, to a specific place and time. And this tool could be used by individuals, but also crucially by cultural and heritage institutions, schools, community groups, to share their archives of materials publicly, and most impactfully, to run face-to-face community projects in their local areas that bring local communities together. So to date, over 30,000 local projects have been run by over 4,000 groups and organisations in over 2,500 cities. And many of the institutions that use HistoryPin, from the British Library to Stanford University to the National Archives, could have built their own version of this technology, which would have been wasteful of resources, but the sort of free open access approach meant that they had access to a shared resource. And it's also about knowing the best role that you can play. So the HistoryPin model gave these local and national partners the tools to run their own local and community engagement projects. They were best placed to do this rather than the central Shift team. And this is what allowed it to gain the reach that it did. In a more recent example, we're currently working with a charity to consider how they can encourage and equip specific audiences to act in a particular way. And as part of our research, we're gaining an understanding of the existing provision in the market, who is already working in this area, and are setting up introductions with organisations they could potentially partner with. So we're equipping the charity to consider what are their own assets and expertise, and how could they add fuel to organisations who already have existing infrastructure or credibility or whatever it is. So I've got another question for you guys. Get out your pen and paper and have a think about this question. How much in your own work do you currently act in a collective way? So obviously with all your different roles, you'll have to think about how this principle comes up for you, but jot down your response, number from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all, and 5 meaning all the time. Okay. And your next question is, how much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more collective way? How much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more collective way? Again, jot down your response, number 1 to 5, 1 meaning not at all, 5 meaning a lot. I'm not going to ask you for your answers, just have a moment to self-reflect. Okay, so let's talk about the next principle, which is about being open. Why do we have this principle? So part of Shift's impact is achieved by not just directly through our own projects, but by sharing the insights and methods and influencing the wider sector. This is part of our organization's theory of change. Working in an open and transparent way, actively inviting builds, challenges and questions from a diverse range of sources helps us to design better solutions. There's lots of overlap between this and the previous principle. Working in the open allows us to signal what we're working on, act more collaboratively, and work with and alongside others working on similar issues. Equally, creating open outputs, for example, research summaries that can be contributed to and even better owned by communities, has the potential for being more sustainable. So it's not just owned by us, which can be quite limiting, but also more equitable, a previous principle of ours. So it's worth saying that working in the open can be really challenging. There's some organizations we partner with who have reason to keep things confidential or don't want to share insight reports, for example. We worked with Google X on a research project into student mental health, which had to be confidential for a couple of years before we could share those insights more widely. But we do advocate for this approach where possible. So what kind of things do we do? We aim for open and transparent practice. We share insights and data publicly. We open the design process to stakeholders and favor more participatory approaches. And we like creating open outputs, for example, favoring wikis over PDFs. So I'm going to share a couple of examples here. So first of all, this project was a project we developed in the early months of the pandemic, and it aimed to help parents who were giving birth and parenting young children during lockdowns, when there's very limited access to healthcare workers and community groups and the social support structures that support well-being. So we worked in collaboration with a network of 16 parent and baby charities to run a rapid design process. And the result was Parent People Boosts, which is a website that is a small gift of thanks, offering a series of self-care packages to all the people dedicated to supporting parents in communities across the UK, from community workers to health visitors to local volunteers. So our team ran a co-creation process with representatives of a wide range of people involved in perinatal support. And a really lovely feature of this process was the Open Design Studio, which was created on Miro. And we've got some screen grabs here, which documented all the insights and ideas and prototypes as they developed. And we advertised links to this online design studio through social media channels of Shift and the partner organizations, and asked people working and volunteering in the early years sector to give feedback, either via the Miro boards directly or by booking in a slot to give feedback to the design lead using calendaring. So very much working in the open. In another example, we work with Welcome to understand online health misinformation and to help Welcome identify the best role it could play in this emerging field. And as part of this, we mapped initiatives already happening around the world. And we pushed to publish this information publicly. So we developed both an interactive infographic, which gave a snapshot of what the current field looks like, but also advocated to create an open wiki, which is a database that anyone can contribute to, which welcomes socialized with organizations and individuals working to improve online health information. In theory, this kind of working allows the information to not date and for it to become something owned by the community, not a single organization. One challenge of this way of working I would highlight, though, is the resource required to advertise and socialize these kind of open data sources, which is certainly one way this project could have been improved, but it was a really interesting experiment and example nonetheless. So I have another question for you now. Please take out your pen and paper and have a think about this question. How much in your own work do you currently act in an open way? Again, this will come up for people in different ways, depending what your role is, but how much in your own work do you currently act in an open way? Jot down your response. 1 meaning not at all, 5 meaning all the time. And the next question is, how much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more open way? Again, jot down your response, a number from 1 to 5, with 1 meaning not at all and 5 meaning a lot. Okay, just for yourself, you don't need to share, but just so be honest. Right, so the final principle that I'm going to discuss today is about being adaptive. Why do we have this principle? Because even if you practice all these other principles, designing for your user, thinking about who holds power, knowing what else is going on, working in the open, nothing is ever fixed. Context and environments constantly change, so we need to keep evolving. The surprise of the pandemic over the last 18 months and the unexpected impact it has had on almost every area of our life is just one example showing that context and environments can change. We need to develop solutions and take a mindset that allows for adapting to changing environments. And additionally, as we learn more, we involve more voices and surface more biases and try things out, and we get an ever more nuanced understanding of an issue. We need to evolve as our ideas based on this learning. So what kind of things do we do? We take an approach where we test and learn and iterate as we go in order to build better, more impactful solutions. We treat user insights as evolving snapshots that need to be added to and changed as understanding and context evolves. We often take a hunch-based approach where we learn just enough to quickly develop something that we test out and learn more from. We create lightweight prototypes from everything from a web build to a brand, so they can be tested in the real world as quickly as possible and iterated. So just going to talk through an example of this in practice. So Shift's been passionate about food equity and the role of food in people's health and happiness for almost a decade now. And our work in this area is a great example of how we've taken an intentionally adaptive approach to respond to a changing context and evolving opportunities for progress. We began by focusing on the spaces right outside schools and piloted a healthier alternative to the classic London chicken shop way back in 2013. That's our first picture here on the top left. The biggest challenge we learned here was around scale. What was successful, that is, loved by kids, affordable and healthier, for 1 or 2 stores was very difficult to replicate. We took these learnings and did more ethnographic research into families and their experiences around food. And this revealed a new opportunity space focused on fast food that actually goes into your home, i.e. takeaways. And our next step was to prototype a healthier, hot delivered takeaway for low-income families, initially set up in Birmingham, where we focus on evidencing demand and testing assumptions, and then in South London, which you can see here on the top right. And our first big learning here was on the big aggregator platforms like Just Eat and Deliveroo, that our mixed menu offer was getting lost. those platforms run on categories like burgers and chicken or Thai, and we were a one-stop shop. So we refined our concept to a set of discrete brands focusing on more targeted, one for chicken, which you can see here, bottom left, one for burritos, and so on. And this significantly improved sales and helped us to bank more learning around commercial viability. Our next big learning was around social impact, because the aggregator platforms limit the customer data that you can access. So we really couldn't track if we were actually reaching the lower income families. Essentially, the social side of our social businesses became impossible to evidence. So yes, again, we adapted the model to make sure our tasty, healthier meals could reach the right people. We changed from hot delivered takeaway to supplying meals to community hubs at scale, as you can see bottom right. This way, we were much more embedded in local food ecosystems. We were plugging into the relationships that community groups already have with families. We're getting more feedback, and we're definitely reaching the right people. We're still learning, of course, but it has only been through years of adapting and learning that we've been able to continue to make meaningful impact in this area. And all the while we've documented our learning and shared this openly via reports and blogs and talks, in accordance with our previous principle about working in the open, to help others working in this area learn from our experiments. Okay, so I've got another question for you guys now. Please take out your pen and paper and have a think about this question. How much in your own work do you currently act in an adaptive way? This may surface itself in different ways, depending on your role, but have a little think. How much in your own work do you currently act in an adaptive way? From not at all to all the time. So just jot down a number for yourself. Okay, and next question. How much would it enhance your impact if you acted in a more adaptive way? So a number from 0 to 5, whatever you want. Just for yourself. Okay, so that gets through our race through the principles that I want to talk about today, about being user-centered, equitable, collective, open, and adaptive. Now I'd like you to each also just take a moment to think about which of these 5 principles most resonates with you in your work. And I'm going to ask you a question saying, if you were to commit to bring one of these principles more into your practice over the coming months, which would it be? If you were to commit to bring one of these principles more into your own practice over the coming months, which would it be?